The second trauma, so to speak, that I faced was after 2 years of visiting the children, I was cut off for over 6 years. So we decided to give a voice to the grandparent issues, and I was encouraged to write a bill.
Welcome to a special edition of Surviving the Survivor. The Dan Markel Murder with Karm on Crime.
Karm, we've got another special episode. We've got Dan Markel's mother joining us in just a second, Ruth Markel. It's been a hell of a few weeks for both of us, Karm. You like to take a little more credit. You say he's your husband. I say he's my father. He hasn't been feeling well. He's been in the hospital now recovering. Seems to be improving a little bit. You feeling a little better now, Karm?
Yeah, it has been an ordeal for a month. He was in ICU. I like how you diminished the impact.
For a month. What's interesting is in your Holocaust survival story, you talk about the devastation you experienced at the loss of your father. However, when my father is on the decline in a hospital and a nursing home now, the weight seems to be on the fact that he's your husband and not my father. You take more ownership of the fact that he's your husband.
Well, I think, unfortunately, sadly, I think Ruth and I share a little bit of the same history. I lost my father at 4.5, and Ruth lost also the child. It's very hard to imagine what it is like to have a father through your life guiding you.
Well, let's just say this. It sucks when either your father or your husband is not feeling well. So hopefully
all right,
that
so
gets
we
better.
don't
Enough
have
of
to,
that.
at least
So,
in this, we don't have to compete.
everyone knows, who's been listening to our podcast, knows who Ruth Markel is, but let me just read a quick bio here. Dan's mom, Ruth Markel, is the author of the forthcoming book about her son's murder. It is titled The Unveiling, A Mother's Reflection on Murder, Grief, and Trial Life. We're going to get into that today. Prior to writing The Unveiling, Ruth was already a noted author, public speaker, and the president of R&M Enterprises, a leading management consulting firm. And Karm, as I am venturing off and broadening my own company, Content Partners Media, you pointed out how incredibly successful Ruth Markel is, to just put a little more pressure on me to perform, but that's okay. Ruth has appeared on 2020 ABC, which is their Dateline-esque show, Inside Edition, Court TV, and of course on Dateline NBC. She also participated in the hit podcast Surviving the Survivor, Over My Dead Body by Wondery, which I listened to, an excellent podcast, which has over 10 million downloads, I believe, on the Dan Markel murder case. But perhaps most importantly, through Dan's murder, Ruth has become a tireless advocate, almost single-handedly helping change Florida's restrictive grandparent visitation statutes, now known as the Dan Markel Act, which we're going to talk about today. And we are also joined by Sarah Franco. She is the founding CEO of JAFCO, which stands for Jewish Adoption and Family Care Options. JAFCO was created to fill an unmet child welfare need in the Jewish community, and JAFCO proudly serves any child or family in need. Over the past 28 years, JAFCO has grown from a one-person grassroots foster care, adoption, and family preservation agency with an annual budget of just $50,000 to a major child welfare agency with a staff of over 200 employees. Sarah also happens to be a mother and a grandmother. I'm in the minority today, the only non-grandmother on the panel. And she is also a second-generation Holocaust survivor, which I suppose I am as well. She was born in Israel and has lived in New York, Toronto, and also South Florida. Now, Ruth, I took the liberty. There's a great website, ruthmarkel.com, which really lays out who Ruth Markel is and what her mission is. And there's some passages on there. So I just wanted to start with something that was I thought was very heartfelt and struck me. I'm not sure if this is also in the book, but Ruth will tell us after. But let me just read this, and this will get us into the essence of the show here today. Ruth on her website writes, and I thought this was really interesting and never thought of this. There are no words in the English language describing a person who has lost a son. We have only words for being a widow, widower, and orphan. Life's progression comes to a stop when you lose a child. You are supposed to face the loss and emptiness and experience the grief. Maybe get closure if you're lucky. Murder as a cause of death compounds the unthinkable and unbearable. The horror and emotional shock of murder adds to the burden of losing your own child. Murder is a life sentence. The life sentence is characterized by the void, flashbacks of memory of the tragedy, anguish, and prolonged anxiety until perhaps justice prevails, which is what we're all hoping for. So, Ruth, was that also included in the book, The Unveiling, as well?
Yes.
Carmela, you're
Yes,
jumping in.
it's a little bit part of the victim impact statement as well, but partially, yes.
Okay, interesting. So this interview today comes just 4 days ahead, but I'm going to release this on September 11th. Obviously, in America, we all know that 9/11 was a horrible day, but it happens to also be Grandparents' Day. And the great Ruth Markel told me, hey, you Google Grandparents' Day because you think, oh, Grandparents' Day is a happy day, like Mother's Day, right, Karm? But in fact, when you Google Grandparents' Day, this is what you find. You find that West Virginia native Marion McQuaid first thought of the idea for the holiday. Commercialism was the last thing on her mind. In 1956, McQuaid was trying to plan a celebration for the elderly members of her community. She made the sad discovery that many of the senior citizens in the nursing home didn't often receive visits from their families. So she set out to designate a day to honor and appreciate grandparents, which is also how Mother's Day came about. Now, thanks to a federal proclamation signed by President Jimmy Carter, Grandparents' Day became an official holiday in 1978. So I will wish you all a happy Grandparents' Day. And for Ruth first, what does it mean for you?
Well, thank you so much, Joel and Carmela, for having me back. And of course, Sarah Franco, who I adore because she really has all the insights into a lot of Florida grandparent issues. But first of all, I'm really excited that we're doing this on Grandparent Day. Thank you for noting in the book, I do talk in my book, The Unveiling, a mother's reflection on grief, murder, and trial life, but there's a large part on the grandparent issue because the second trauma, so to speak, that I faced was after 2 years of visiting the children, I was cut off for over 6 years. And that made me really start to think that I have some kind of an obligation to go further on the grandparent issue. We are privileged, our family, to have media. We went out on 2020. We talked about grandparent issues, but that wasn't enough. So we decided to give a voice to the grandparent issues, and I was encouraged to write a bill. And then I met Karen Halpern-Cyphers, who really took a lot of the initiative to get the Markel Act passed. So in June 24th, 2022, Governor DeSantis signed a bill, which is the HB 119, but is really informally called the Markel Act, which deals with really opportunities for families and grandparents in particular who are facing any kind of tragic situations where one of the partners in the marriage is deceased, but the other there's findings for criminal and civil findings. This is really a great opportunity for families that already have some kind of criminal aspect. But what happened following this initiative, which has been really, really miraculous, I suddenly had a friend of mine over and she's looking through my phone. This is interesting. I won't tell you I'm the best techie in the world. And it's not the messenger requests that come in. The normal ones are for Facebook, but there's other ones that I've never seen. And in my phone, which she's searching for me, she says, Ruth, you have so many fans. And I look a little closer, and these are not fans. These are people who came because of the recognition of the name, the Markel Act, are asking for services, what to do, how to do, where to find it, and so forth. How do they go about it? But what I want to really differentiate today, and this has been an exciting program to set up with you, is today we're talking about existing grandparent services. This is for families and children and grandparents who do not necessarily have a civil or criminal finding against them. So today we're talking about the Non-Grandparent Act services. And we will have, there's a part 2. This is really, I appreciate your show taking the initiative. It's almost like a public announcement service. And we will have a part 2. And the part 2 will actually deal with the grandparent initiatives which relate to the Markel Act. And Karen Halpern-Cyphers will come on because they're going to have a process about how to use the Markel Act. So I just want to state again, today we are talking about grandparent services that already exist in Florida. And you have a wonderful guest, Sarah Franco, who can talk much more about how to frame the current grant services that are available. So I pass it over to you, Joel, and Sarah.
I hope that you will join us for part 2 as well. But Sarah, first off, just tell us, how did you come to meet Ruth before we get into some of the details of grandparent services?
Well, my initial phone call with Ruth was very typical. She was a former social worker and grandparent, really calling from out of state, just inquiring as to the nature of services that could be available to a grandparent in a situation where there was a potential for the parents not to be available. She shared with me that, in fact, her son had been murdered at the time of that call. We didn't know exactly, there was no one that had been held accountable completely for it, but and there was only suspicion, related to the family at that time, and she wanted to know the process. So I explained it to her and shared that in the event where there's no family members available and a parent is incarcerated, that the state foster care system would be the one to step in. However, my agency, we are a licensed foster care agency, but we also accept children privately from family situations. And I assured her that, in the event that something would happen, that we would be happy to provide temporary care for the children until a family member was available. So that's how we began. And I just remember being struck by her tragic situation, and yet the calm and very compassionate demeanor that she had, really for everyone involved, and not making any judgments that were a little bit unfounded, at the time. And so, and since that time, we haven't been able to do much except, just check on her and provide support and follow the case in case we are needed.
It's amazing how level-headed Ruth is able to continue to be in light of the circumstances. Carmela, you are a social worker and you're chomping at the bit.
I just, if I remember correctly, there was a moment when Ruth got really more anxious than normally with this situation, and her anxiety really shot up. And was that the moment that she consulted with you what would happen if the whole family would be arrested? Was that subsequent to this first meeting, or would this happen at the first meeting?
It was at the same first meeting. And unfortunately, the information that I shared with Ruth about my cell number and what to do was leaked. It was leaked, and that actually led, to some degree, to the withdrawal of some of her visitation, although it wasn't going great at that time to start with. So that was unfortunate that happened because it led the family to believe that maybe she was looking to do something, which in fact she wasn't. She was just really being a social worker and just, making a backup plan, which we do as social workers, right, Carmela? We always have a backup plan.
That's how I understood from what you wrote, that your anxiety shut up. What will happen? The kids, if the whole family is arrested, the Adelsons, and what would happen to the kids? And you reassured her that there would be temporary arrangements made to protect the children. And then when this leaked out, Wendy, you refused to, even though you tried to communicate and clarify, and you also tried to, through attorneys, clarify. Wendy decided this is the perfect pretext to completely cut you off. Am I correct?
That's correct. You got it right, 100%. And I just want to say that Sarah at the JAFCO, really, they have really remarkable facilities. When I visited, even they have the emergency care. If you picture a little daycare center where the kids are there and there's a few beds, and that's really one of the things. But it's more important, and I think Sarah will really bring it out more. It's the full range of support and concern and compassion that the way in which JAFCO and others, by the way, respond to a request, an inquiry. And that's really all it was. And it's for that reason that I think it's so important that I want to encourage other grandparents, and Sarah will explain the services in a minute, but reach out, don't sit with it. Don't be afraid. All you're doing is asking for information. So let Sarah and Joel continue.
And so Carmela keeps alluding to the fact that she read this and read that. She's talking about an advanced copy of Ruth's upcoming book called The Unveiling, A Mother's Reflection on Murder, Grief, and Trial, which Carmela was riveted by.
Yeah, I couldn't put it down.
You told me you could not put it down. So that is coming out shortly. So I was just, I'm a little late to the whole Dan Markel murder case. So I'm doing a lot of homework at night, and I was reading a deposition. It was a interrogation and a deposition of Wendy Adelson, and in it, she's asked, what was your relationship with the Markels prior to Dan's murder? The Markels could visit, they could do all this. How did it change? And essentially, Wendy said, well, Ruth Markel and Phil Markel wanted the children to be put into a Jewish foster home, and that's when I decided I was going to cut off communication. Ruth, is that how it happened? Is that how you remember it happening?
No, I think there's like that comment, and I think we should really move on for other grandparents too. That comment is totally inappropriate, and Sarah confirmed that in writing to Wendy and had a conversation with her. There was never a request for foster care or anything like it. And Sarah can highlight, you don't do foster care through an agency. I think maybe Sarah just comment on the fact that it's a court process.
Right. So the thing is, in the United States, there in every state, in every county, there's an entity that's charged with the ability to remove children. And as a private foster care provider, a Jewish agency in the community, that is not what we do. The interesting thing, years ago, like in the 1920s, the Jewish community was able to go in and remove children. But then in the 50s, child abuse laws were passed. And since that time, it's really been a state mandate for removal. We can accept children who need our care, and we do. So JAFCO is the only agency in the Jewish community in the entire country at this moment that has the services that we have for children, ranging from prevention all the way to emergency shelter and group care and foster care and adoption. And we do it for the Jewish community and without the Jewish community as well, outside of the Jewish community. But we have a range of programs. And one of the programs that we have is for grandparents who are raising their grandchildren. There's an estimate of over 6.5 million children in the United States right now who are living with at least one of their grandparents. And so that accounts for over 50% of children who are living away from their parents So if you take the children that are away from their parents, either in foster care or because there's some type of concern in the family that there was placement, half of those children are living with grandparents. So it is a huge issue. Yet grandparents really have no rights in general. And the fact that Ruth and her team were able to pass this law that gives grandparents in this very specific murderous type situation at least access to the courts to plead their case for custody is really remarkable. And it consumed with all of the stress and grief that she's in, that she was able to, I think it's a huge honor to her son's life that she was able to turn this terrible situation into something that at least is positive. The other thing that is a huge issue with grandparents is it most of the time, it's not usually like just a car accident. I don't mean to say that flippantly in any way. It's usually something that happened in the family. It's not typically a murder. That's extreme, but usually there's mental health or substance abuse or some major issue that's going on in the family that leads the children to live with the grandparents. Yet, when that happens, the grandparents are left alone and they don't know what to do. So our agency, we have a small grant from the federal government, actually, that allows us to support grandparents who are raising their grandchildren. And we do a couple of things. Number one, we make sure that the kids are in school, and then they're in aftercare, and then they're in summer camp and winter camp and spring break camp to give the grandparents a little bit of a rest and respite, because it's hard to all of a sudden be in your senior years and start parenting all over again. The second thing we do is we take care of any legal issues that might be present. We help the parents get a lawyer, the grandparents get a lawyer, and go in, and if they need temporary custody, because if there's, God forbid, a need for even a surgery, they don't have access, to do that. Sometimes there's like a kitchen table agreement that the parents sign over, but that's not legal. And also for them to have legal custody so that their adult child who has issues, there's a reason this happened. They can't just come one day, maybe under the influence and just take the child, that they actually get custody. So those are the kinds of things that we do. And with this Markel law, if there was a grandparent that was in the situation where there was a murderous environment, or there had been a murder that was committed, we would be happy, at least in South Florida, to provide the support to a grandparent that was in need.
So if you're a grandparent out there and you have to be listening to this podcast, and you've got a problem, you've got an issue, an issue with your grandchild where you think that you need to take custody or get involved, what is the first step? What is step number one?
Just call us and we will do our very best to connect any grandparent that calls, even if they're outside of South Florida, which is really, and we have an office also in Philadelphia. If it's outside of those two areas, we will still do our best to connect them with a social service agency that can assist them. So they would just call our office. I can definitely provide you with the phone number, and our clinical director will get on the phone and talk with them and do whatever we can to be helpful, the same way that I spoke with Ruth that day.
And again, the organization, Sarah Franco is the CEO of JAFCO, which stands for Jewish Adoption and Family Care Options. JAFCO, we'll get the number to put on YouTube when we post this, which will come out on Grandparents' Day on 9/11. So, Sarah, you kind of ran through this, but just to break it down. So, what are the essential services that JAFCO provides?
So we call it case management. So basically, a case manager goes into a family. We go into the home, number one, and meet with the family, and we really assess what their needs are, because every family is different. But we're able to make sure that the children have all of their needs met, education, if they have any special needs, to connect them with any services. They are suffering the loss, either temporary or permanent loss of their parents, so they may need counseling. A lot of the children have lived in difficult environments before coming to their grandparents' home. There's often a trauma that precipitates the actual move, so the children are traumatized and they need therapy. So we want to make sure about that. We also want to counsel the grandparents to make sure that they know how to speak to the children properly about what's happening, and that they don't include the children in any kind of adult alienation type activities that could be happening in the family, because we know how detrimental that is. We also help with visitation and make the visitation safe. So if there's a need for supervision in the visitation, we can provide that to the family as well, to make sure that the visits go well. And we have support groups on site every week. Every Tuesday morning, the grandparents come together. They support one another with a licensed clinician leading the group, and so they know that they're not alone, which is very important to them. We provide support for them to get access to legal services, a lawyer if they need to get legal custody, if they haven't gotten it yet, but they're just doing it like out of the goodness of their heart. There's no protection for the child. The parent could show up any day and with a police officer and remove the child, even if they've been living there for 10 years, if they don't have custody. So we want to make sure, and the parent always has the right to come back and request custody back if they can prove to the courts that they have fixed whatever the issues were that allowed for the child to come to live with the grandparent. And then, of course, the respite services of making sure that we send the child to camp for the summers. We do overnight camp. We have a few camps that donate to us in the Northeast. And so the grandparent has a little break. And also during the school year, we have we pay for the child to go into aftercare till 6 p.m. So at least when they have the day, they have a few hours to themselves, because, grandparents who are raising their grandchildren, as wonderful of a gesture it is, there's a lot of loss that happens. First of all, they're no longer the grandparents, they become the parent, and they lose that beautiful unconditional relationship, where they can say yes to everything, and instead they have to enforce discipline and other things. Also, grandparents are dealing with their own aging process at the same time that they could have a 2-year-old in there. You could be 70 years old and now you're running after a 2-year-old, and maybe some of the grandparents start off as a couple, and then during the child's childhood, one of the grandparents either gets sick or becomes incapacitated or even passes away. And then you have the one. So I've seen our grandparents over the years. I see them walk in our building and I see them age, from the stress of all of it. So we really try to do what we can to help them with that stress and to make it, and also to have a backup plan. If, God forbid, something would happen where the grandparent can't continue, we do have this residential facility, as Ruth mentioned, where the kids could actually come live. And the kids worry about that, because they see their friends' grandparents dying, and they're like, what's going to happen to me if my grandparents die? And we talk about that with the kids, because, we don't want them to have that stress, and they know that there's a backup plan. Sometimes there's another family member that might step in, but we just want to have that plan.
Karm, you and I have a tendency to use, as you call it, black humor. I call it sick humor, but I was kind of intelligent to have kids as late as I did in life. I have young kids, so hopefully I will not have to deal
I am 83. I would collapse if I would have to take care of a 3-year-old, a 6-year-old, and an 8-year-old. But
Karm, you had a question. Also,
I
want you to ask your question, but I remember distinctly as a young boy, 7, 8 years old, you used to help mothers who were, I think, crack or heroin addicts. Crack was a big deal in the 80s. Did you ever deal with the grandparent issue yourself? And what was your question?
No, I dealt with it all the time. In certain communities, it's almost like the norm that the grandparents raise the grandkids. And usually the grandmothers alone, the grandfathers are nowhere in sight. But going back to Ruth and going back to this law that was passed by the governor of Florida, I think it's a big step forward, a giant step forward. And it is a great job, but it's not finished, because what if the other parent wasn't indicted yet or wasn't involved with the legal system? Then you cannot even appeal for visitations. Correct? Am I correct in saying this?
Okay, let me clarify. So just to be very clear, in Florida and elsewhere, but particularly in Florida, the natural parent has a lot of rights around autonomy and privacy. And so in general, if you want to find out if the grandparent even wants to go to school and ask the teacher, how's my grandchild doing? The school is not obliged to even include them or tell them. But let's go now with your question about the Grandparent Act, which was passed in June. It deals with very specific opportunities for visitation. It's if there is a deceased parent, right? So in other words, one parent has died and the other parent, there's findings for the living parent who has criminal or civil findings against them. It's under those circumstances that the Markel Act, so to speak, will kick in, where they have rights to approach a court and so forth. But most cases, and this is why I'm so delighted Sarah's here and explaining, most cases actually don't fit that criteria. So we need to learn more about what are the opportunities for grandparents to seek help under other extreme circumstances which don't have a criminal or civil tone to them necessarily. And there's not another deceased partner. So like the legislation that just happened is miraculous, that Florida had such restrictive guidelines before that they did do something on grandparents' rights. But the point is, why I wanted to have this session, and I really appreciate it, is everybody else is out there and they're hanging because they don't know where to go for service. And so this is really, it's the larger population, like Sarah just identified. And another point I just want to share, there's an organization for some of these other parents, all grandparents, called Alienated Grandparents Anonymous, okay? It's in Canada and it's in the United States. There's chapters and there's the supports that the grandparents can get together in privacy and really discuss it. So let's go back to Sarah, because I think Sarah can give you the broad base of other organizations as well who could be used to access service. So what I'm saying, to answer you, Carmela, is the law is terrific, but the law is specific. So we need to address the broad group of people.
Okay, but the law is restrictive and not sufficient, because you are still in the situation, bottom line, where you cannot visit with your grandchildren. Because she was...
My situation? Go ahead.
Yes, your situation. Because you are representing a group of people whose one spouse passed away and the other spouse was not indicted, and the other spouse decided not to let the grandparents see the children.
I think what Ruth is saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ruth's case is very extreme because there was a murder in this case.
No, it has nothing to do with the murder. It has with the indictment. That she wasn't, that legally you still cannot visit with your grandchildren, even though this law was passed, because in this case, the ex-wife was not legally indicted yet. Am I correct?
Criminally, okay, so here's how I can answer your question. So yes, the answer is true. We don't meet the criteria of a criminal or civil finding at any time right now. So the criminal one is up to justice. The civil one, however, is up to the family. So in other words, and many, the discussion has always been there. And I'm not talking that we're doing anything, but there is an opportunity for a civil suit here. So the answer is yes, we aren't using the law. So that's the answer to your question.
Okay.
But there are other opportunities which other families do have to use the law at the moment.
And I think the bigger question, and I think we all know the answer, but are you able to tell us the current relationship you have with your grandchildren? You're still not able to see them. Is that correct? Because that's what Carmela just implied.
No, we had one visit. No, we actually had April 2022 was a miraculous, crazy month. So what happened in February? So when Catherine McBanawa's trial was canceled and postponed to May, we did get a note, an email from Wendy that she was making a bar mitzvah for Benjamin, the oldest son, and that we were invited. So that the trial was May 16th, the bar mitzvah was May 14th. And then I said, I really would like to take the boys out for ice cream before the bar mitzvah. Can we see them on the Friday before the Saturday morning? And Wendy wrote back and she said, look, if you want an in-person visit, come in April. And we did. We went 6:30 in the morning and we had a visit with the boys and it was terrific. We got back on a plane and this is April 20th, April 21st in the morning. I get a call. The FBI, exactly. Charlie Adelson is arrested. And, and here's history in 24 hours, 2 big breakthroughs in the situation. So following that situation, we were disinvited from Wendy because of the fact that she felt at the time the bar mitzvah would happen, it might not be so safe. In other words, a little bit of an excuse, let's call it. Others did go on Zoom. We could have been on Zoom, but that was then. And then I asked her for a Zoom on the actual birthday, which was July 29th, and she accepted. We had a limited Zoom call, and I also wanted Shelley's children. So these are the cousins, to really have a chance to see the kids visually. By Zoom, I didn't care. Now at least they did have that opportunity. Everybody has seen each other face to face, whether Zoom or in person. And at least we all have a memory of what we look like, at this stage, which is important. And recently I just asked Wendy again for a visit just the other day, and I haven't heard back yet. So we'll see what happens.
I know this is very sensitive and I'm not sure what you can answer and what you can't, but from what I understand, your correspondence with Wendy is all via email, not on the phone. Is that right?
That's correct. I mean, the Zoom is a little more. She's actually not on the Zoom with us. The children are doing the Zoom and so forth. But yeah, it's very limited. We have to open up a lot of doors to get this into even some kind of a working relationship, let's call it.
And then I'm pushing here a little bit, so feel free to push back. But then when you meet for ice cream, is Wendy present when that happens, or you pick the children up?
Yeah. She was present. She brought another person along who turned out to be the right fit we have to both of us set terms down a little bit in terms of what we're going to talk about, what we're not going to talk about. It's very delicate, and now it's even more delicate since Charlie's arrest. But I want to extend this opportunity really for the larger grandparent population and look at everything else.
100%. I understand that, but that has to be incredibly difficult for you when she's around, I would assume.
I want this to be also the larger one, and Sarah Franco will tell us, but I also wanted to know what's happening with you, since I didn't speak with you for a long time, and I wanted to know, what is going on with you and relationship to this topic. of grandparent visitation. So now that we clarified, I don't have any more needs to ask questions.
You'll remain silent.
I remain silent.
I wanted to read one other thing from, again, this is from ruthmarkel.com, and may or may not be in her book, but thought this was an interesting passage as well. She writes, but of all of these traumas, the most challenging has been the alienation from Dan's sons, my grandsons, Lincoln and Benjamin. I reached out to Wendy repeatedly, and when no answer was received, I reached out to her lawyer to attempt to set up a visitation plan she could approve. Again, no response was received. At that point, Dan's father and I took one step further. We appeared on Dateline, making public our plea to see our grandchildren. Again, nothing came of this. So it's been a uphill battle the whole way. But Sarah, back to you now. So Ruth mentioned there are other agencies, I guess, besides just JAFCO. So I also assume this is not just one. This is not affecting just one socioeconomic group. This cuts across the entire fabric of the nation. Everyone could be affected by this, correct?
Absolutely. In fact, it happens more in families who live in poverty more than not, because that unfortunately leads to other neglect and abuse issues at times. But any social service agency, any community mental health center in a community would be a source for grandparents to start in their local community. Also, there's a legal aid society pretty much in every major city in our country, and seniors are served by legal aid free of charge. There's usually a long wait list, so that's sometimes a barrier, but it's definitely something that grandparents, it'd be a place for them to start to research the law. Like, for example, in Florida, if you were actually raising your grandchildren for 6 months or longer, and then were denied custody, visitation rights, then that gives you a little tiny bit of an in it. The law is like very unclear, but you know, sometimes when you try and you get a family court judge that's willing to interpret the law and open up the case, then sometimes you have some access. So, and of course, if God forbid that grandparents, and this has to be done 100% in good faith, we can't make up things, but if the grandparents are concerned that there's abuse or neglect going on in the home, if they get calls from the grandchildren that there's insufficient food or supervision, or any kind of excessive physical discipline going on that's leaving marks, things like that, then there is an abuse hotline in every state that grandparents can access as well, and that will bring out an investigator. Also, there is, in many communities, the police department, if there's been a very long period of time without communication and there's any kind of concern about the safety or welfare of the children, that you can ask for a welfare check, or if you live out of state and you normally have communication, but the communication is stopped, you can ask the police department to go. They just knock on the door and they just say, can I see the kids? Are they okay? And then they report back to you that they're at least breathing, which is not much, but it's hard. It's hard for the grandparents to access all these services. And that's why having a case management agency like ours, we do all of the parts for you. You don't have to go to the lawyer and to the therapist. We arrange for everything. And that's the beauty, of it. But the problem is, funding things like this. And if there's any private foundations that are listening to this podcast, that in your own community, if you want to create a support system for grandparents raising their grandchildren, or grandparents like this, you could find a competent social service agency in your community and fund a program like this that would be available. Even just having somebody to talk to. The first call that I had with Ruth, I didn't do anything for her, but I just was able to listen to her, and as a friendly voice, and just to have a place to call. And I just want to say for the record that JAFCO has no prejudice in this case, and whatever would ever be needed in the future for these children, every family We're not here. We're not lawyers. We're not a judge. We're not a jury. And our concern is just the safety and the well-being of the children, and whatever services we could ever provide, if ever needed, we would be happy to do so, and without any judgment, and just to do the right thing for the children and to help them understand.
One little detail, having worked in the past 40, 50 years in inner cities or certain neighborhoods, do you do any outreach?
We do outreach just as a social service agency to the community. And unfortunately, the interesting thing about JAFCO is we're largely privately funded, and South Florida is a mecca because of the weather for a lot of grandparents to live. And so unfortunately, many of even our donors, who are people of means, end up with situations where they have an adult child that has either a mental health or a substance abuse issue, and something happens with the grandchildren and they call us. So all of our fundraising activities that we do to raise the money that we need to operate end up also being educational. And we try at all of our events, all of our publications, all of our social media to also educate the community about the need. And sometimes people speak to their neighbors, and the neighbors help them and say, you should call JAFCO. And a very large percentage of our referrals come from grandparents. So yes, we do try to reach out, and we, and anybody that asks in South Florida will eventually, if there's anything to do with children not living with their parents or the risk of that happening, then people eventually get to us. Especially, we've almost been around 30 years. At the beginning, not so much, but we try to do as much outreach as we can.
And hypothetically, let's say, a parent or two parents are abusing drugs, a grandparent calls JAFCO. Is there a kind of an average process time, or as they say in Canada, process? How long does it take once they contact JAFCO for something to actually, get accomplished in terms of getting the grandparents involved?
It's really hard to answer that question because every situation is different. But in terms of if the drug use or the abuse is there's a danger to the children or suspected danger, we would assist the grandparents in making a report to the abuse hotline immediately, and then within 24 hours, somebody will see those children. The outcome of that is different depending on each individual situation, but we can at least get eyes on the children within 24 hours.
It's interesting. Something that's kind of standing out to me on a personal level is just what I've gone through with my own father, who's 88, turning 89 in November, God willing. Being in the hospital, now in a rehab facility, he's getting excellent care, but there's definitely a delineation. You see, how do I say this politically correctly? You see that in our society, that people of grandparent age are sort of, how do I say this?
You got yourself into deep water.
No, older people are there's sort of a partition in our country, and I think there's a tendency to not really weigh the needs of, let's say, a grandparent as much as a parent, for example. People aren't walking around our society and saying, I wonder how that 80-year-old is feeling about the fact that, they can't see their grandchild. Whereas, if it's someone of a younger age, there's more of a sense of urgency. There's definitely an age bias.
Ageism.
Ageism. There's a couple moments with my father where things were not good, and basically they said, "Do you want us to try to revive him if it comes to that?" And we said yes. But my sister, who's a physician, said the easier thing for them with a lot of elderly patients is you don't resuscitate, and their time has come and they've gone. So there's a sense. What I'm getting at is I've experienced it firsthand that people of a certain age younger people might not think that their needs are as great as they are, I think is what I'm saying. But grandparents, there is a need for grandparents to have these rights. Correct, Sarah?
Yeah, I think in general, our culture does not respect the aging process like maybe in other cultures where, your parents come live in the house with you. We place our parents in, very easily we discard them. And we don't, I don't think we recognize the wisdom of aging as much in the Western
Sarah,
culture.
just for the record, in the last day, I said to my lovely mother, I said, hey, why don't you move into a building right next door to us? You can see your grandchildren. You can hang out. She goes, what the hell do I want to live next to you for? What am I going to do next to you? She says.
No,
so
the point
I
is
rescinded the offer.
The point is
the truth is it's a brand new building and I wanted to use the pool.
I figured he had an ulterior motive. He lives 10 minutes away, so it's a no-brainer.
There's no greater
and
son
my
than
daughter
me.
has a place which she comes down to right next to me. So there was they were fighting over
my
me.
sister
I loved
comes
it.
3 times a year. My mother says, what am I going to do? Your sister just bought a place. I said she comes 3 times a year. We're fighting over my mother. Not every grandparent should be this lucky. But Ruth, back to you. This journey, you really went on a journey from grief to advocacy. Talk to us about that. How did you make that pivot? How difficult was that?
Well, I think it's a very important point. As I mentioned in one of the other podcasts, maybe even yours, I actually, so after we were deprived the opportunity to visit, which was in 2016, I was told, I was encouraged, and I think this is really important in my grief message. I was encouraged by the American lawyers who work with us diligently. Hey, Ruth, I think the only way you're going to really resolve this is to write a bill. And a bill, I'm sitting in Toronto, Canada. I'm going to write a bill in Florida. I mean, where do these worlds, how and where do these worlds mesh? And then afterwards, I was thinking about it, really planted the seed. And then for about another 2 years, I didn't move right away on this issue. My close friends, and even Sarah had mentioned to me, you're going to need a lobbyist. And others had said to me, you're going to need a lobbyist even to move it forward. And so what happened was actually after the trial of Garcia, which was in 2019, it happened to be a birthday weekend for me. And I was ready. I think I needed to do the victim aspect. I have a lot of victim here business. So the justice victim part of my life needed some kind of movement or resolution. And then I think as soon as I saw that there was some opportunity, and I met Karen, and this is of all places, it's a joke, in the hairdresser, and she says, can I give you a hug? And I said, yes. And I look at her and I say, I don't know her at all. I never met her. And she says, she's part of a group in Tallahassee who are very committed to Dan's situation. And how can she help? And then we went for a coffee. And I just blurted it out, grandparent alienation. So I was ready. So the opportunity, the issue about going from grief to advocacy, I call it grief to advocacy to promise to outcome. So now we're at the outcome stage. And I encourage other families now who are facing loss. It doesn't matter what kind of loss. You think about all these things, particularly death, and particularly death of a child. I won't say murder even. And you have all these ideas on your head. Should I do a foundation? Should I do another tribute? Should I do another program? And I say do it, but you could take your time to get it done. So the point, I have a new saying, I just created it recently, is try not to get lost, L-O-S-T, in the loss, L-O-S-S. And the idea being that you can get lost in the loss, and therefore, how are you going to redefine yourself? And I think that was where my road to advocacy really started. I kind of was ready to move on to the next. It was a huge issue. I mean, I was tackling not small stuff, but I really do think you can take your time, but it is also very helpful at some point to think to yourself, okay, I can make some shifts in this terrible process. So that was really what happened to me, and I'm very grateful of the outcomes.
And on Ruth's website, it talks a little more specifically about the Markel Act and says that the bill says that grandparents can petition courts for visitation with their grandchildren where the living parent was found culpable by a criminal or civil court for the other parent's death. We're talking a little bit more wide-ranging today. But back to this, Ruth, the Markel Act, who does it serve and who's not included?
Well, I think it does serve, first of all, geographically, it's serving all of Florida. Not included is a large group. And why I say that, remember, there is a deceased parent, so that's a fact on its own. Then there is the necessity of meeting the criteria of criminal and civil findings. And that's also very, very specific. So I think that there are many, many situations. In fact, people wrote me. I'm surprised myself at how many opportunities there are to use the Act, which was one of the incentives for creating the program today and getting it right in terms of it's a tool available to grandparents in deep, deep crisis. And it also involves the justice system, too, in that aspect of it. But now take it out of that specificity, whatever the word is, and we see now that there's so much else that has to be talked about. And I'm very appreciative to your program, to Sarah today, because we're really trying to do as much as we can, I'll call it for regular, and there are no regular issues here, but for issues of grandparent concerns, which are outside of this criminal aspect. There are criminal pieces to it because the adult children can be committing felonies, which Sarah would certainly know a lot about, but it's a different part of the process. Maybe comment on that, Sarah.
Yeah, I think one of the key differences, so there have been hundreds of attempts to pass grandparent legislation previously, and Ruth, was told right up front that this is going to be a very hard go. And the first time, actually, they weren't successful. But I think the difference between her, and you can hear it. I heard it the first day I spoke with her, and you can hear it today. You hear how objective and how level-headed she is. Why? Because she didn't. A lot of people, when they've had trauma, they turn towards advocacy to help them heal the trauma without the therapeutic track. And that it does not work, because then you're seen as, you come off as an extremist, as angry, as biased, and people, and a lot of grandparents are so emotional. I just became a grandmother myself, so I get it. Like, there's a love for grandchildren that it's just really not explainable. It's even different than your own children. So a lot of times there's a divorce, there's lots of, family stuff going on, and the grandparents are out of their mind. And that's not going to work to pass a legislation, and so Ruth, she was able to have a group of advisors. She really listened, she understood, and then the law, and parents' rights have to be protected too. Right. I mean, as much as we love grandparents, but you don't want somebody to be able to, just any person to be able to come inappropriately and infringe on your right to have privacy and whatever. So that parental right is so strong that that's what's really kept the grandparents out of being able to pass anything. And the fact that we were able to pass something, Ruth was able to pass something, even though it's very specific, and even though it does exclude a lot, but it opens the door for other people who are competent and level-headed to come up with specifics. And it doesn't mean that everybody that has this situation gets visits. It just means that they can approach a court and let the judge hear their story, which historically the grandparents have been excluded from going to family court. They're not parties in the case, except if they're actually were raising their grandchildren. So it's very hard to get status to do that. And so it's a constant fight, but you have to keep trying, and you can't give up. And that's really the key. But for anyone else who's out there that has had this, it's very important before you begin the process that this is not a therapeutic process. You have to engage in your own therapeutic track. You have to get yourself to a place where you understand all the sides and all the parties, and you're not judgmental, and you come in and you use experts who know the law more than you, and you're not a crazy grandparent just screaming and yelling, because it does not work. And then Ruth is just so unique in that, and I think that is why she's been successful. And laws set precedents, and so somebody else now in another state can use this law, and it could just go from here. We don't know the end result of how this law can spiral in a positive way and impact grandparents' rights appropriately in the future. So I think it's a great beginning. It's very exciting, and I just think I admire Ruth so much to find the strength to keep going and find a positive track, but also to do the work where she is able to present herself in the way that you see her, and that everybody sees her, always professional and calm, and not speaking with language that her grandchildren could ever hear anything disparaging about any of their parents or family members. That's not her role to do as a grandmother, and she keeps that very important role of not alienating and not doing the same thing that perhaps other people might or might not be doing. And that's very important.
And Ruth is very eloquent. And
there is one more trait that Ruth has, and I think that would be the hardest for me to do, is the patience to wait and wait and wait and wait for justice. And you have been like
Karm,
unbelievable.
You would not handle this the
No,
same
I
way.
wouldn't have.
I wanted to read one more passage because I am writing a book called Surviving the Survivor about my mother's story and life advice that she's giving me. So I'm looking at other authors, and Ruth is very eloquent. So here's a passage from the website, and I think it may be in the book as well. She writes, and it's very important to point out here, there's multiple victims in this. Obviously, Dan lost his life. Ruth's life was heavily affected, but the boys too. So she writes, the grief of losing Dan's boys is all too familiar, bringing emotional roller coasters and the need for patience, as Carmela just alluded to, beyond what feels doable. Without a doubt, estrangement from Benjamin and Lincoln has been the most awful and consequential thing that my family and I have experienced following Dan's death. We must live with the understanding that our grandsons themselves have lost out on love, roots, direction, commitment, and dedication. We miss them and love them dearly, and I know that one day Ben and Lincoln are going to hear this and know that that's what Ruth was feeling, and her intentions for the Markel Act were obviously all for the better for the grandchildren. Sarah, any closing thoughts or remarks? I mean, you do take philanthropic donations. South Florida is a mecca for the wealthy, excluding me. So if you're listening to this in South Florida, crack open those wallets. There's no better organization to donate to than JAFCO. But Sarah, any final comments?
No, I appreciate that, and definitely anyone that wants to become more involved, we welcome our volunteers and donors to become involved. It's really a community issue, and we should all be there as a Jewish community, helping Jewish children and all children, because that's what Jewish people do. But I just think I think the key is really never to go it alone, and to get support for yourself someplace. It doesn't have to be a therapist or social service agency. It could be a friend, it could be clergy, it could be a support group, but just whatever your situation is, I encourage everyone to really just reach out and get some support for themselves. And I think it makes a big difference to share, and that you connect with another human being, so you're not alone.
Sarah, do you have services for middle-aged white men whose careers have taken a turn for the worse?
Well,
absolutely. We'll make an exception.
Listen, they are also children.
We're also children.
Yes.
Karm,
absolutely.
Karm, usually when we're wrapping up, you go.
Not today.
Not today.
To confuse you.
Wow, thank God. So, Ruth.
Usually I carry on like a maniac for another 5 to 10 minutes, but not today.
Ruth Markel's book, again, is called The Unveiling, A Mother's Reflection on Murder, Grief, and Trial Life. She's also found at ruthmarkel.com. Ruth, any closing thoughts?
Yes, I have a lot of thanks. I want to tell you, in part of grief and all this justice stuff, I am very grateful. And I think gratitude is an important topic on its own. And I just want to say I'm very grateful. Thank you, Sarah, for the beautiful comments. Thank you, Joel, Carmela. I really appreciate all of your beautiful descriptions, and it helps. You know, all these things help you. I call it my friends and family and community help me stand up. They keep you standing. I want to say one thing that, just to sum it up in this respect, that don't lose your hope for reunification. And I mean the opportunity for families to get support, to get help, not necessarily that all it's going to be beautiful, but at least keep on track, you know, and that's an important message. And rather than don't give up, just, you know, really just keep it going. And Danny had a very famous saying that he used. I actually quoted it in the book, which is keep the fire burning. So keep the fire burning is the message here. Keep the energy on the mission and getting the help.
And I love what you said.
You.
I love what you said too, Ruth. I think it was the most poignant thing, which is don't get lost in the loss. And that applies to a lot of things. A lot of things. It's a very profound statement. Do not get lost in the loss. I know we mentioned her name a few times, but I think, and Ruth will agree, she deserves an extra special shout out to Karen Halpern Cyphers. Without her, a lot of this would not have happened. Right, Ruth?
Correct. She's the champion. You know, it's one thing to strategize, to think about, but it's another thing to develop and implement. And I have to give Karen all the credit with the teams, with the politicians, with the lobbyists. This is a community effort. You know, it takes a village. This didn't happen really, not so much overnight. It actually happened quite quickly, but it did take a village. And Karen, and I have to say also Justice for Dan, Jason Solomon, the social media site, helped us at the beginning with, trying to create a petition. We've had tremendous support, and I'm really grateful to this whole group.
I hope we will be part of that support group.
Thank you again.
And Ruth, real quickly, can you tell people when the book is out, where they can buy it, The Unveiling?
Sure. It's out September 20th. We're really getting closer. It'll be out on the digital formats as well. And I believe it's October where it's coming out in audio by Recorded Books. You could just Google the Unveiling, a mother's reflection on murder, grief, and trial life, and you'll see all the availability of where it is now. Many places are carrying it, including Amazon, but it's available in a lot of places now. And I think that let your public go and read it. I think there's a lot of insights that can help others as well.
And we're working behind the scenes to get some speaking engagements for Ruth, where you can meet Ruth, you can meet Karm, you can yell at me, and it's going to be...
I have a last word.
It's going to be exciting this fall. Carmela, the last word, Carmela. There's a show on MSNBC, The Last Word. Your show should be called The Last Words.
I think what you learned from your mother, if I'm not mistaken, never give up. Correct?
Right. That was actually from my uncle. It's in the
Oh,
book. Who was
Elasa.
saved in the Holocaust, saved, not survivor in the sense that all of you have had traumatic experiences. His is a miraculous story, but it was never give up from my uncle. My mother managed everything. My mother was this woman of just great capacity. She was a widow of at 38, and I suggest you read the book, and you can find all of the supports that I've had along the way, that I really had.
The book, once again, The Unveiling, A Mother's Reflection on Murder, Grief, and Trial, out at the end of September. Long live Canada. Love you, America.
Bye-bye.
We'll do it again.